us now. Michael Hallen, Philip H. Knight Chair in Defense Strategy at the Brookings Institute, just wrote a piece that I think is worth pulling up about you, in which you said basically you'd say that there's nothing remarkable about President Biden's foreign policy, but you'd give him solid marks. And I'm wondering, as we go back, how we square this, that you've got 160 attacks against U.S. troops. We went through the worldview, and what is solid about the Biden administration's response?
Yeah, thanks. Nice to be on. Well, this was an overall assessment coming into 2024 at the 3-year mark of their foreign policy globally. So what I tried to do was to criticize them where I thought they were wrong. And, for example, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which I criticized at the time and now. But on Russia and China, which I think are the two more important issues because of their capabilities, their ability to threaten us with nuclear weapons, I think overall Biden's handled those two problems fairly well. And in the piece, I even say where I think he's essentially continued certain policies that were begun under President Trump. So this was not meant to be a partisan criticism. There are some places where Biden faced whole new challenges, other places where there was a continuity. But my overall assessment is if you sort of weight China and Russia more than other issues, I think that on balance, you wind up with a reasonably solid performance, because those are the places where our very survival can be threatened.
No, fair enough in terms of in terms of the scale of how conflicts can get out of control and out of hand. We can do whatever we want to the Iranians. Russia and China have a whole different level of strategic capabilities. Bob Gates, former Secretary of Defense, also under President Obama, thus Vice President Biden. I think he's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. And Gates was always seen as a both nonpartisan and a pretty fair-minded guy. This would be my question. I feel like at every point, the Biden administration, and to a certain extent the Obama administration, Biden administration in particular, is always worried about the escalation, right? Didn't want to give more weapons to Ukraine, fear of escalation. Don't want to attack the Iranian proxies or Iran itself, fear of escalation. Always talking about we don't want to escalate, we don't want to escalate, we don't want to escalate. Why?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And I think, by the way, Gates's comment, and I respect him a great deal myself, that was about 10 years ago. And a lot of it was coming out of the debates about Iraq and Afghanistan at that time. So I think that's the general context in which Secretary Gates made those comments. You are certainly right to say that when there's been a new threshold crossed by Iran, we have to be willing to cross new thresholds ourselves. And so I'm with you on that. The fear of escalation cannot be the only driving consideration, because we have to establish our own credibility. And so there are competing concerns. I would point out that Iran does not attack the United States homeland, that Iran has limited its attacks on American interests in the region except through proxy. That's very bad. Iran's a horrible regime, but there is a certain amount of restraint they've shown so far. The question is...
Hold on. Forgive me to interrupt you just with some breaking news. Houthi attack in the Red Sea, shot down by the USS Gravely. That's one of the Navy ships. That would be down in this area right at the bottom of the map. And this would have been happening a couple of hours ago. Iranian-backed Houthi militias fired one anti-ship missile from Houthi-controlled Yemen towards the Red Sea. The missile was shot down. You seem to make a distinction between Iran and its proxies. Why?
Well, no, I think you're right to assume that anything the proxies do, Iran needs to be accountable for. What I'm suggesting, I wrote a piece today in which I laid out some possible kinds of attack options for tonight. And they may not be that far off from what you were discussing with the general just a minute ago. For example, I talked about how you could perhaps go after oil infrastructure. And what you could say to Iran is, we can cause a little damage right now, or a moderate amount, and we can cause more. Because what you have to think about is what's Iran's next move, and how do you deprive them of the advantage of being able to escalate against us within a certain realm of attack in a way that we don't easily respond to. So what I'd like to do is attack in a way where it's clear that we could escalate further in that same direction. That could be a couple of headquarters of the IRGC. It could be oil infrastructure, but it should be something meaningful. And I agree with your point. This cannot be only about restraining ourselves.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.